We are taught to believe that safety lies in our daily routines, that locking the door and turning on the porch light is enough to keep the world's malice at bay. But on a bitterly cold January night in Los Angeles, my rigid routine almost became my death sentence. If my driver hadn't intentionally broken the rules of the road and bypassed my street entirely, I would have walked into a silent house that had already been claimed by a predator. My name is Eleanor Vance. I am 61 years old, and this is the story of how a single act of human attention rewrote the final chapter of my life. Just 6 months prior to the night everything fractured, my world had already collapsed in a much quieter way. I stood alone beside a sterile hospital bed in Glendale, holding my husband Arthur's hand as the machines around him finally went silent. We had been married for 39 beautiful, structured years. Arthur had spent his life teaching high school history, filling our days with stories of the past, while I worked decades as a meticulous legal assistant. When the aggressive cancer finally took him, the life insurance policy barely scraped the surface of the mountain of medical bills and funeral costs. What little remained disappeared with terrifying speed into property taxes, utility bills, and the sheer exorbitant cost of simply existing in a city that does not slow down for your grief. With no financial cushion left, I was forced to pack up our lives and move back into a small, aging bungalow in East Los Angeles, a property Arthur and I had bought decades ago when the neighborhood still felt like a promise of a bright future. Now, the reality was starkly different. The paint on the exterior walls was peeling like old parchment. The streetlights outside flickered unreliable rhythms throughout the night, and the absolute silence inside the house felt heavier than any noise ever had. My son, Thomas, lived out in Arizona. He called when he remembered to, but the truth was, we were no longer close. Grief has a cruel way of stretching the silent distances that already exist between people. At 61, retirement was a luxury I could no longer afford. To keep a roof over my head, I managed to secure a CA-DEM position as an auditor at a private civil legal records archive downtown. It wasn't a prestigious law firm. It was a quiet, secure operation that housed physical case files, sealed depositions, and delicate evidentiary documents for ongoing high-stakes litigation. My specific duty required immense focus and discretion. I had to log incoming files, verify the strict chain of custody, and flag any internal inconsistencies. The work was tedious, but it required an eye for order. This is where a crucial piece of my nature mattered. I was a woman of absolute neatness. I kept my desk, my files, and my home arranged with mathematical precision. I knew exactly where every single item belonged, down to the millimeter. I memorized the precise placement of everything in my life, a trait born from my legal training, but one that would soon become my first line of defense. The pay was just enough to keep me afloat, but the schedule was brutal. My shift ended at exactly 11:45 p.m. For the first few months, I relied heavily on the public transit system, but a series of budget cuts suddenly forced the city to cancel the late-night routes. The last bus now pulled away from the station 15 minutes before my shift even ended. Walking through the shadows of downtown Los Angeles alone at midnight was not something my aging body or my frayed nerves could manage anymore. When I told Thomas, he canned through the phone line, insisting that I immediately download a rideshare app. I resisted for weeks, terrified of the technology and the idea of getting into cars with strangers, until I truly had no other choice. That was how I met Raymond Ray Miller. The first night his dark, immaculate sedan pulled up to the curb outside the archive building, I hesitated. The central streets of Los Angeles at that hour felt like a movie set after the crew had left, hollow, echoing, and cast in a deceptive orange glow. Los Angeles is a city that moves at a breakneck pace, blinding its inhabitants to the world around them. Millions of people rush past each other every single day, looking down at their screens, viewing busboys, janitors, and elderly pedestrians as mere background noise. In this city, you can become a ghost long before you die. To the wealthy tech executives and the bustling crowds, a Goa-Fu 61 Tuoi or a middle-aged rideshare driver are completely invisible. I swallowed my fear, looked at his profile on the app, 5 stars, hundreds of trips, and slid into the back seat, offering a quiet greeting. Ray didn't push for small talk. He simply adjusted his rearview mirror, nodded with an expression that held a deep, tired wisdom, and pulled into the dark traffic. In that sea of neon and indifference, neither of us knew that our shared invisibility was about to become the very thing that would save my life. Over the next few weeks, our silent agreement shifted into a predictable, grounding anchor. I quickly realized that Raymond was always the one who accepted my ride requests at exactly 11:45 p.m. on Tuesdays and Fridays. In the rigid world of rideshare algorithms, such consistency was a statistical anomaly, a loophole we both quietly exploited. Recognizing my vulnerability as an elderly woman traveling alone past midnight, and sensing his own quiet reliability, we made a discreet, unspoken arrangement. I began canceling the ride on the app the moment I stepped into his car, handing him the fare in cash. It was a small breach of corporate policy, but in a vast, indifferent city like Los Angeles, it was our way of building a fortress of safety. It gave me a familiar face in the dark, and it gave him a guaranteed fare without the app siphoning away his hard-earned wages. By October, the autumn wind rushing down the concrete canyons of downtown Los Angeles began to carry a sharp, biting chill. The late-night shifts at the archive left my hands trembling from a combination of mental exhaustion and low blood sugar. Seeking comfort, I started brewing a thermal flask of hot Earl Grey tea right before my shift ended, adding a generous spoonful of pure clover honey and a thick twist of fresh lemon peel. One evening, as the tires hummed softly against the asphalt, I unscrewed the lid, poured a second cup into a spare travel mug I had packed, and gently extended it toward the front seat. "You really don't have to do that, Eleanor," Ray said softly, his eyes momentarily meeting mine in the rearview mirror before returning to the road. "I know," I replied, the steam rising between us, filling the sedan with the comforting aromatic scent of bergamot. "But the nights are long, Ray, and the cold has a way of settling into old bones." He accepted the mug with a slow, deliberate nod that felt far heavier than simple politeness. Over the next month, those 12-minute journeys became the only time I interacted with another human being face to face without a pane of security glass or a legal ledger separating us. Through shared sips of warm tea, the walls of defensive isolation we both wore began to crumble. Ray eventually shared the map of his own quiet grief. He had spent nearly 2 decades working as a highly skilled commercial electrical systems technician across the city until a devastating scaffolding collapse crushed 2 vertebrae in his lower back. The subsequent legal settlement vanished into medical bills, the job evaporated, and the chronic pain became a permanent tenant in his spine. Driving nights allowed him to manage his physical limitations while keeping his days completely open to care for his elderly mother, whose memories were fading in unpredictable, heartbreaking waves of Alzheimer's. But there was a deeper shadow in his voice when he spoke of his son, a young man who had walked out of his life years ago after a bitter argument. I was always too busy fixing the city's grids to listen to what was breaking under my own roof, Ray confessed one rainy night, his grip tightening imperceptibly on the steering wheel. He tried to tell me he was drowning, but I only heard background noise. In a metropolis that treats the elderly and the service workers as invisible specters, two ghosts had finally looked each other in the eye. That cup of Earl Grey tea was no longer a simple beverage. It was a profound act of mutual acknowledgement. It proved that in the heart of a callous city, human warmth could still find a way to keep the darkness at bay. The trouble began in the quietest corners of my night shift, deep within the sterile, cold aisles of the Downtown Records Archive. It started innocently, a few civil settlement files flagged during a routine digital backup as incomplete. But as a former legal assistant, my mind was trained to seek patterns in chaos. I began a quiet, unsanctioned audit of closed cases involving elderly plaintiffs, injured laborers, and undocumented immigrants, the most vulnerable people in the American legal system, individuals who rarely had the resources to question a delayed payout. What I uncovered made my chest tighten. Over the course of 2 months, millions of dollars meant for life-saving surgeries and basic elderly care had been siphoned off, redirected by shifting small, seemingly negligible percentages of 5 to 10% into untraceable shell accounts. I knew I couldn't leave this tracking to chance, so I began quietly logging the specific file numbers, dates, and names in a yellow legal pad I kept at home. Because my nature was rooted in absolute neatness, I was deeply attuned to the physical geometry of my world. Every object in my aging bungalow had a permanent coordinate. I knew the exact angle of the ceramic mug on my nightstand, the precise placement of the brass key on the kitchen counter, and the distinct, rusted creak of my garage door hinge. So, when the subtle shifts started happening at home, my internal alarms went off immediately. One evening, as Ray dropped me off at the curb, the exterior streetlights flared and died in a violent spasm of sparks. Ray killed his engine, his eyes locking onto the dark Hien Na. "Your porch light is flickering on a different circuit frequency, Eleanor," he noted, his electrical technician background sharpening his gaze. He scanned the empty road, then pointed through the rain-streaked windshield toward the opposite curb. "And that faded, dark Ford sedan parked across from your driveway. I've seen it 3 times this week. The engine block is cold, but the windows are heavily tinted. Someone is sitting inside a dead car, Eleanor. I try to laugh it off, offering the standard hollow defense of a lifelong Angelino. Los Angeles is full of broken vehicles that never move, Ray. But deep down, my gut instinct was beginning to twist. The true breaking point of my safety net occurred 2 nights later. I walked into my kitchen after a long shift, reached into my tote bag, and realized my yellow legal pad was completely gone. Panicked, I searched my meticulously organized living room, knowing with absolute certainty that I had left it right beside the telephone. It wasn't just misplaced. It had been handled. The small decorative rug by the back door was shifted 2 inches to the left. The rusted latch on my side gate, which I always secured with a wooden wedge, was hanging loosely. Someone had bypassed my perimeter, entered my house without breaking a single window, and taken exactly what they were looking for. The realization settled into my bones like ice. That night, my hands trembling violently, I locked the front door twice and braced a heavy kitchen chair under the deadbolt. The next evening, my voice shook as I handed Ray his travel mug. I told him about the missing pad and the unlatched gate. He didn't try to offer placating logic or calm me down with empty platitudes. Instead, he adjusted his rearview mirror to look directly into my eyes, his face etched with a protective severity. From now on, you look behind you every few feet when you walk out of the archive, Ray instructed, his voice low and firm. He tapped the dual-lens camera mounted securely next to his rearview mirror. My car is equipped with a high-definition, commercial-grade dashcam. It records 24 hours a day, both the interior cabin and the exterior road, entirely legal under California's transit security laws. If that car or anyone follows us tonight, they are on a digital file that uploads straight to a secure cloud server. You are not invisible anymore, Eleanor. I am watching. The trouble began in the quietest corners of my night shift, deep within the sterile, cold aisles of the Downtown Records Archive. It started innocently, a few civil settlement files flagged during a routine digital backup as incomplete. But as a former legal assistant, my mind was trained to seek patterns in chaos. I began a quiet, unsanctioned audit of closed cases involving elderly plaintiffs, injured laborers, and undocumented immigrants, the most vulnerable people in the American legal system, individuals who rarely had the resources to question a delayed payout. What I uncovered made my chest tighten. Over the course of 2 months, millions of dollars meant for life-saving surgeries and basic elderly care had been siphoned off, redirected by shifting small, seemingly negligible percentages of 5 to 10% into untraceable shell accounts. I knew I couldn't leave this tracking to chance, so I began quietly logging the specific file numbers, dates, and names in a yellow legal pad I kept at home. Because my nature was rooted in absolute neatness, I was deeply attuned to the physical geometry of my world. Every object in my aging bungalow had a permanent coordinate. I knew the exact angle of the ceramic mug on my nightstand, the precise placement of the brass key on the kitchen counter, and the distinct, rusted creak of my garage door hinge. So, when the subtle shifts started happening at home, my internal alarms went off immediately. One evening, as Ray dropped me off at the curb, the exterior streetlights flared and died in a violent spasm of sparks. Ray killed his engine, his eyes locking onto the dark Hien Na. Your porch light is flickering on a different circuit frequency, Eleanor, he noted, his electrical technician background sharpening his gaze. He scanned the empty road, then pointed through the rain-streaked windshield toward the opposite curb. And that faded, dark Ford sedan parked across from your driveway. I've seen it 3 times this week. The engine block is cold, but the windows are heavily tinted. Someone is sitting inside a dead car, Eleanor. I tried to laugh it off, offering the standard hollow defense of a lifelong Angelino. Los Angeles is full of broken vehicles that never move, Ray. But deep down, my gut instinct was beginning to twist. The true breaking point of my safety net occurred 2 nights later. I walked into my kitchen after a long shift, reached into my tote bag, and realized my yellow legal pad was completely gone. Panicked, I searched my meticulously organized living room, knowing with absolute certainty that I had left it right beside the telephone. It wasn't just misplaced, it had been handled. The small decorative rug by the back door was shifted 2 inches to the left. The rusted latch on my side gate, which I always secured with a wooden wedge, was hanging loosely. Someone had bypassed my perimeter, entered my house without breaking a single window, and taken exactly what they were looking for. The realization settled into my bones like ice. That night, my hands trembling violently, I locked the front door twice and braced a heavy kitchen chair under the deadbolt. The next evening, my voice shook as I handed Ray his travel mug. I told him about the missing pad and the unlatched gate. He didn't try to offer placating logic or calm me down with empty platitudes. Instead, he adjusted his rearview mirror to look directly into my eyes, his face etched with a protective severity. From now on, you look behind you every few feet when you walk out of the archive, Ray instructed, his voice low and firm. He tapped the dual-lens camera mounted securely next to his rearview mirror. My car is equipped with a high-definition, commercial-grade dashcam. It records 24 hours a day, both the interior cabin and the exterior road, entirely legal under California's transit security laws. If that car or anyone follows us tonight, they are on a digital file that uploads straight to a secure cloud server. You are not invisible anymore, Eleanor. I am watching. What I had falsely assumed to be random happenstance was, in reality, a predatory web tightening around us. Kramer Cole, the facility's elusive night guard, was far from an oblivious drunk rambling in the back of a cab. He was an apex predator playing a psychological game of cat and mouse. He had already discovered that an internal audit was compromised, and his surveillance of the facility had quickly pointed him toward me. More dangerously, he had tracked my nightly departures and realized that Ray was my steadfast sanctuary. Instead of hiding in the shadows, Kramer weaponized his knowledge. Over the course of 3 weeks, he began deliberately hailing Ray's vehicle from various street corners near downtown late at night. He would slide into the passenger seat smelling heavily of stale whiskey, slurring his words, pretending to be just another exhausted worker drowning his stress. But it was a calculated performance. He would loudly yell into his cell phone, staging fabricated arguments meant entirely for Ray's ears. Yeah, that old biddy in the records vault is digging where she doesn't belong, Kramer would bark into the receiver, his venomous gaze checking to ensure Ray's dashboard screen was active. She thinks she's being smart with her little notes. House on Cedar Street. Sitting empty on Tuesdays and Fridays. If she keeps pulling files, She's gonna look out her window one night and find out exactly how easily an old wooden front door shatters. It was a chilling method of indirect terror. Kramer knew Ray was my regular driver. He was using Ray as a psychological courier, hoping the terrifying warnings would be delivered to me, forcing me to abandon the audit out of pure, paralyzing fear. He believed he was completely manipulating an unsuspecting rideshare driver. But Kramer Cole had fundamentally underestimated the quiet technician sitting in the driver's seat. Ray was a man whose life had been fractured by the tragic consequence of not listening when it mattered most, and he had sworn to God he would never let a warning sign pass him by again. Ray didn't panic. He didn't let his emotions betray him. Every time Kramer slid out of his car, Ray would calmly pull over to the side of the road, open his digital notes app, and log the exact timestamps, drop-off locations, and verbatim phrases Kramer had used. He cross-referenced them with the schedule I had shared with him over our shared cups of Earl Grey tea. The pieces aligned with a terrifying, undeniable precision. This aggressive passenger wasn't just a threat to a random auditor. He was hunting the vulnerable woman who sat on the back seat of Ray's sedan twice a week. Ray knew that under California's strict legal framework, verbal threats captured on a commercial vehicle's dashcam with an open visibility notice were entirely admissible as criminal evidence of stalking and intimidation. He was quietly building an ironclad digital cage for Kramer, recording every slurred threat, every mention of my address, and every predatory promise. The trap was set, but neither Ray nor I realized how quickly Kramer would lose his patience, transitioning from a psychological game into an immediate, physical nightmare. The night the predictable rhythm of our lives finally split open, the city felt deeply unsettling long before I understood the reason why. It was a miserable, rain-slicked Friday evening in mid-January. A thin, oily drizzle coated downtown Los Angeles, morphing the flickering streetlights into distorted, smeared halos of amber light. I clocked out of the record's archive at exactly 11:45 p.m., shivering as the heavy security door clicked shut behind me. Ray's dark sedan was already waiting at the curb, its headlights dimmed, its engine purring with a familiar, grounding warmth. I slid into the back seat, unburdened my heavy tote bag, and handed him the thermal flask of fresh Earl Grey tea without a single word. Usually, Ray would offer a quiet thank you, execute a precise U-turn, and make a familiar right turn 2 blocks later toward East LA. Tonight, however, his posture was rigid, almost frozen. His large hands held the steering wheel at a defensive 10-2 position, his knuckles white under the soft dashboard glow. Instead of turning toward my neighborhood, he pressed down on the accelerator, merging the sedan directly onto the rain-blinded, fast-moving traffic of the I-290 westbound expressway, heading entirely away from my home. "Ray?" I asked, my voice laced with a gentle confusion, though a sudden spike of heat flared in my chest. "You missed the Cedar Street exit, Ray. We're heading toward the valley." He didn't answer immediately. He kept his eyes locked on the dark expressway, navigating past the spray of semi-trucks. When he finally spoke, his voice was dropped to a low, hyper-controlled register that immediately chilled my blood. "I need you to stay absolutely calm, Eleanor," Ray said, adjusting his rearview mirror so our eyes locked in the dark. "And more than anything, I need you to listen to me without questioning. We are not going to your house. Fear has a specific, immediate sound. It is the sharp, shallow catch of your own breath when your reality suddenly tilts. Ray, you're terrifying me," I whispered, pulling my woolen coat tighter around my shoulders. "Where are we going?" "Somewhere safe. Somewhere we can talk without being seen by the wrong eyes," he muttered, smoothly pulling the sedan off the expressway and into a pitch-black, abandoned commercial office park. He parked beneath a dead security light, killed the ignition, and turned his entire body around to face me from the front seat. The sudden silence inside the vehicle was deafening, save for the rhythmic, frantic drumming of the heavy rain against the glass roof. "Before I picked you up tonight, Eleanor, I broke our schedule," Ray began, his tired eyes holding a terrifying urgency. "I drove past your block on Cedar Street at 11:15 p.m. to check the perimeter. My instincts told me Kramer was accelerating his timeline." My mouth went completely dry. "What did you see, Ray?" "I saw the dark Ford sedan parked directly in your driveway," Ray said, his voice dropping into a register of pure, protective gravity. "The lights inside your bungalow were completely dark, but the car's engine was still warm, I could see the heat distortion rising off the hood in the rain. I killed my own headlights, pulled over 2 houses down, and watched through my camera feed. Kramer Cole didn't just sit in the car tonight, Eleanor. I watched him get out. I watched him pull a pry bar from his jacket, unlatch your side gate, and systematically K-shot the service door to your garage. He entered your home 20 minutes ago, Eleanor. He is standing inside your dark kitchen right now, waiting for you to walk through the front door. The world inside the car seemed to spin out of control. The realization that my sanctuary had been violated crushed the remaining air from my lungs. He tried my door? He's inside. I stammered, tears of sheer panic burning behind my eyelids. He's looking for your audit notes, or he's looking to ensure you never speak to management, Ray said firmly, reaching forward to grip my trembling hand with a steady, unyielding warmth. If I had dropped you off tonight on your regular routine, you would have walked blindly into an ambush. You're not going back there. We are heading straight to the downtown police precinct right now. Your routine didn't save you tonight, Eleanor. Our connection did. The downtown police precinct felt completely severed from the rainy night outside, smelling heavily of industrialized pine disinfectant and bitter, stale coffee that had burned on the burner for hours. It was just past 1 in the morning, a hollow hour when the truth slips out into the open because everyone is simply too exhausted to pretend anymore. Ray and I sat side by side at a scratched metal table, watching a detective named Miller review the digital files. Ray handed over his phone, his systematically detailed logs, and the raw, legal video recordings pulled directly from his sedan's two-way dashcam cloud server. Detective Miller's posture completely shifted the moment Kramer Cole's slurred, venomous voice filled the small interview room. It wasn't an expression of shock on the detective's face. It was a dark, immediate recognition. He stepped out into the hallway and returned a few moments later carrying a faded, dusty case manila folder. Kramer Cole doesn't just drift around town, Detective Miller said heavily, leaning his palms flat against the metal table. He handles contract night security rotating across 3 different facilities tied directly to civil litigation storage, including your archive building. The room seemed to tilt slightly on its axis. He has the keys, I whispered, the final puzzle piece of the altered files dropping into place. That's why there were never any alarms tripped when the settlement files disappeared. That's why the digital access logs looked perfectly clean. He wasn't breaking into the archive vault. He belonged there. Yes, Detective Miller replied, his eyes holding a profound gravity. But Kramer Cole didn't target your department by coincidence, Eleanor. He was monitoring you because of your audit, but the moment he realized your full name, this operation became personal. The detective opened the old folder and slid a physical photograph across the table. It was an aging, glossy print of a group of men standing proudly in front of the federal courthouse steps downtown, taken 20 years ago. I gasped, my chest tightening into an agonizing knot as I recognized the face on the left immediately. My late husband Arthur stood there looking young and vibrant, his arm thrown around a younger, smiling colleague. A younger Kramer Cole. Your husband was the key witness in a massive federal civil fraud case 2 decades ago, the detective explained, his finger tapping Kramer's youthful face. Arthur's meticulous testimony directly broke Kramer's original contracting firm, stripped him of his professional license, and effectively blacklisted him from corporate security management for life. Kramer Cole spent 20 years ruined, reduced to working low-wage night watchman contracts in the shadows of the very legal system that broke him. A wave of intense nausea hit me. Arthur never told me his name, I choked out, covering my trembling mouth. He never mentioned any of this. Arthur probably thought the chapter was closed when the trial ended, Detective Miller said gently. But Kramer didn't forget the debt. When he saw your audit flagging his new embezzlement scheme, he realized exactly whose widow you were. You became an immediate risk to his money and a golden opportunity for his revenge. The heavy silence of the precinct was shattered 20 minutes later when a radio on Miller's belt crackled violently to life. A tactical unit had moved on my East LA bungalow. They intercepted Kramer Cole inside my dark kitchen, catching him red-handed with a backpack containing industrial document shredders, accelerants, and a printed folder labeled contingency. Inside that folder was my name, my exact route, and a single handwritten date, tonight. I covered my face and sobbed, a raw, primal sound of pure terror and relief breaking from my chest. I had been standing inches away from total erasure. Ray didn't speak. He simply reached across the cold metal table and placed his large, calloused hand near mine, close enough that his steady, unyielding warmth could anchor me back to the land of the living. The Superior Court of California did not offer immediate relief. It offered a somber finale. Kramer Cole was sentenced to the maximum term allowed by law for financial fraud, grand theft, stalking, and attempted first-degree burglary with the intent to commit a felony. Justice was served with the cold, mechanical precision of a gavel striking wood. Yet, as I sat in the courtroom watching them lead him away in handcuffs, I realized a profound truth. Justice can punish the predator, but it does not automatically restore what fear has stolen from your spirit. The psychological echoes of a violated sanctuary do not vanish with a guilty verdict. What truly healed me was the beautiful, unexpected tapestry of human connection that bloomed in the wreckage of that nightmare. The local news stations picked up the story, hailing the vigilant rideshare driver who used his electrical expertise and legal dashcam to save an unsuspecting Go-A-Foo. Ray didn't see himself as a hero. He viewed himself simply as a man who had finally learned to pay attention. 2 states away in Arizona, Ray's estranged son saw his father's face flash across his television screen. He listened to the anchor describe how Ray had meticulously kept logs, recorded threats, and refused to look away from a stranger's quiet distress. Deeply moved by the realization that his father had transformed his painful past into a profound shield for another human being, the boy picked up the phone. Their first conversation was awkward, filled with long, heavy pauses and raw, shaky breaths. 2 men slowly relearning how to speak to one another without the baggage of old blame. A month later, his son packed his bags and intentionally moved back to Los Angeles, determined to rebuild their relationship brick by brick. My own son, Thomas, flew in from Arizona the weekend after the arrest. The terror of almost losing me shattered the emotional distance we had allowed to stretch between us. We sat in my small kitchen, weeping over cold cups of coffee, finally talking about Arthur without the suffocating weight of unexpressed grief. Our individual isolations collapsed, giving way to what I now call our chosen tribe. We established a new, sacred American tradition: Sunday dinners at my aging bungalow on Cedar Street. The house was no longer a monument to peeling paint and ghosts. It was reinforced with high-tech security cameras, motion-activated floodlights, and heavy deadbolts installed for precaution. But the true security of that home didn't come from the steel locks. It came from the people inside it. Every Sunday, Ray, his fading mother, his returning son, Thomas, and I would crowd around the dining table, sharing heavy platters of pot roast and loud, healing laughter. I kept my night position at the archive, refusing to let the shadows dictate the parameters of my life. A few weeks ago, a new clerk started on the night shift, a young girl with exhaustion etched deeply into her shoulders, working late hours because the crushing weight of student loans left her no other choice. I recognized that familiar, guarded tightness in her posture. Before my shift ended, I walked over to her desk, extending a steaming ceramic mug. "It's Earl Grey with a bit of honey and lemon," I said gently, offering a warm smile. "The nights are long here, dear, but you are not alone." She looked up at me as if I had handed her a rare piece of gold, her eyes shimmering with gratitude. "Thank you," she whispered. "You have no idea how much it means just to be seen." I smiled, because I knew exactly what it meant. Long Tot did not save my life through a stroke of magical luck. It saved me because a simple gesture created a connection. Connection creates an unyielding awareness. Awareness creates decisive action, and action is the only thing capable of changing a catastrophic outcome. We live in a world that constantly instructs us to mind our own business, to look down at our screens, to treat drivers as invisible conveniences and passengers as mere transactions. But this story exists because two people chose to see each other as human beings. We are never truly alone in the dark, as long as we choose to keep our eyes wide open for one another. This story remains a living testament that even the smallest, most ordinary acts of kindness can create an unseen shield against the darkness of this world. Your willingness to look someone in the eye today might just rewrite the final chapter of their life tomorrow. Pushpin, from which city or corner of the world are you listening to Eleanor and Ray's journey tonight? Please drop the name of your city or state in the comments below. Let us fill the comments section with our global community, proving that human connection and compassion are burning brightly from Texas, Chicago, and London, all the way to wherever you are breathing right now. Pushpin, and if you are anxious to see the next chapter of this journey, please comment part 2. Don't forget to hit that like button, share this message of hope, and subscribe to the channel so you never miss our next deeply human story. Stay vigilant, stay safe, and above all, stay kind.